about it. Think about it.
Let the bass kick. Let the bass kick. Let the bass kick.
Think about it.
Hi, everybody. My name is Brendan Smith. I'm the Arts Humanities Coordinator for the City of Takoma Park, and I'd like to welcome you out for the latest, greatest poetry reading in our Takoma Park Arts series. It's in celebration of National Poetry Month. We do all kinds of free events here in the auditorium, including poetry readings, film screenings, art exhibitions you can see out here in the atrium, and dance, theater. You can go to takomaparkmd.gov/arts to get our e-newsletter, or you can sign up for that out in the atrium. You can also get our handy-dandy brochure, which has our upcoming events, including next Friday, April 28th, 7:30 p.m. We're having a shorts night, which should be a lot of fun, with films by 5 DC area filmmakers, including a local sort of homegrown feature featuring kids from Takoma Park Middle School. So, without further ado, I'm excited about our reading tonight, featuring David Dayton, Amy Eisner, Laura Golberg, and Bonnie Naradzay. We've got Takoma Park Poet Laureate Taylor Johnson here, who's going to do the introduction for each poet as they come up for the reading. We also, out in the auditorium, I believe some of the poets will hang out there after the reading, maybe have chapbook or something else for you to check out. So thanks again for coming.
Good evening. Like Brendan said, my name is Taylor Johnson. I'm the Poet Laureate of Takoma Park, Maryland. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to start by reading this really short poem by Mary Ruefle that I like a lot called Keeping It Simple. I take the bird on the woodpile, separate it from its function, feather by feather, I blow up its scale. I make a whole life out of it. Everywhere I am, its sense of loitering lights on my shoulder. I really like that poem. It's about killing a chicken, you know what I mean? Wow. Beautiful, Mary Ruefle. All right. So our first poet is David Dayton. David Dayton specialized in technical and business writing for 30 years. After retiring in 2019, he revived an earlier career devoted to creative writing. Copper Beach Press published his first poetry book, The Lost Body of Childhood, which is available for free online at Google Books. A second poetry collection and a novel will be published soon on Amazon.com. Welcome, David.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to this reading. Thank you, Taylor, for that introduction, and thanks to Takoma Park Arts for making this reading possible, and especially thank you, Brendan, for coordinating and promoting this reading series. Tonight I will read 5 of my poems, 2 from my first book, The Lost Body of Childhood. The other 3 are in a new book just published on Amazon, The Bus to San Simon. And after the reading, I'll have a few proof copies of this available out in the lobby if you'd like to look it over. Poetry Northwest in the Seattle area published this first poem I'm going to read. I submitted it there thinking who would be most likely to appreciate a poem about a very foggy day. Wind and Strategy. All day the trees hunched their backs like people waiting in the rain to catch a bus. Sparrows are only a guess. Your eyes light on the vacant sill or a quivering branch. So you are tired of just looking out. Everywhere the gray metal boxes on telephone poles, a mothball fleet anchored in the sky. Dozing off, you imagine the sea of loneliness on the moon, or the hands of old women lowering shades at dusk in Grandview, Kansas. You wake in late afternoon to find the buildings across the street obscured by mist, their windows black except for one amber light glowing in the den of a retired clerk. You peer closer as he examines a rare stamp through his quizzing glass, an etching of this city, skyscrapers surrounded by apartment flats, block after block emerging from fog until he locates his own window. And through it, as you are seeing now, the lamp above his desk, the book of stamps, but nowhere, no matter how tightly he squints, himself. Though you know it's impossible. When he looks up and stares out the window, you have the feeling your eyes have met. After my wife graduated from UC Santa Cruz, we moved to Ithaca, New York, where she earned her PhD in soil chemistry at Cornell. During those 5 years, I worked as a typesetter for the Cornell Daily Sun, which let me use its typesetting machines to publish a poetry magazine and books of poetry. That creative work often kept me working late at night in the summer. The title of this next poem is Conversation with the Inner Man, and it's dedicated to the poet Charles Semick, who wrote these lines: though you utter every one of my words, you are a stranger. It's time you spoke. One humid June night, the late ride home became a languorous cruise on the quick-dipping slowly curving back road. A dream I wished would go on and on ended in the carport. I watched my hand turn the key, switch off the headlights, and sat for a moment a little bit scared, wondering if it's dangerous to let him drive. Walking the flagstone path to the house, I felt him freeze, stopped. What this time? The sky moonless, oceanic black, stars glimmering like the lanterns of deep-sea fish. All around, millions of leaves, breathing. Spooked, I wanted to walk, whistling to the porch, but he balked. Flexed senses, easing only when my nostrils caught the fragrance of wet, mown grass. Tang of a memory from way back. His joy, womb speech, heart talk. Ithaca, New York, of course, is famous for its gorges and many waterfalls, and Cornell for being high above Cayuga's waters. My wife and I lived about 3 miles east of Ithaca, which made for an easy ride bike into town, but it became a thrill ride at the end. This poem is about one such experience. It's titled A Visitation. Biking downtown on a bright, gusty day, a merrymaking chemical in my brain, or planetary conjunction, or God knows what all, elevates my good mood into a natural and thus inexplicable high. A wave of joy that crests as I coast, breaking as lightly as I dare down East Buffalo Street. Through tears, bliss, or wind, I evangelize the one true way, silently. Eyes appealing to each passerby, rejoice. When I spot a friend wrapped in his own thoughts, I greet him in mine with a Whitman-esque camarado and sail by without hollering. My smile the bars of some blessed angel's hoosegow. As a newly minted Cornell PhD, Nancy took a job at Mexico's premier agricultural research institution, then housed on the campus of the University of Mexico at Chapingo near Mexico City. We lived in a crudely built but spacious and comfortable house in a tiny village called San Simon. I welcomed the chance to become the house spouse and wrote my first novel there, which I intend to publish this summer. This poem is from the early days adjusting to my new role, which my neighbors found puzzling, especially after our first child was born and they watched me hanging diapers on the clothesline in the yard. The House of Little Smiles. Mellow after a long shower, I sit in the living room for a few minutes before fixing dinner. I think how banal the moment is in English. The housekeeper taking a break. So you're the mistress of the house, my neighbor teased, and I grinned, nodding proudly, having misheard el ama as el alma de casa, the soul of the house, a designation I've decided to keep. Now that I've dusted, swept, mopped, vacuumed and tidied up, mowed, pruned, weeded, and raked, I collect my wages. The square white coffee table glistens. Toward one corner, I put a garnet vase filled with purple bougainvillea, decanted distillation of the teeming yard, whose trim I admire through a window that is, if I say so myself, pellucid. I'm ready to draw up my Plan de San Simon, establishing this house as a sovereign nation. I see we already have a flag. The wild morning glory unfurled a blossom from the pole where our little gate bell dings, its cord yanked by a partisan breeze. 2 lizards in file scurry and stop along the top of the yard's high wall. They can be our border patrol. The book, The Bus to San Simon, which I've just published, has 6 other poems about our time in San Simon, and I have proof copies if you'd like to look it over in the lobby afterwards. This is the title poem, which, fair warning, is a micro story about 4 minutes long. So please settle in and hang on. And afterwards, I'm going to end with a poem that was composed for this occasion just this morning. The Bus to San Simon. Motor groaning through a muffler that's more like a microphone. This village jalopy lurches and rocks, rattling along at a jaunty burro's pace. Both hands clutching the luggage rack, I sway in the crowded aisle. We standing hover like sulky ghosts above those with seats, the lucky ones complacently oblivious to us. The young man I'm hanging over is in another world, transported there by a pocket-sized comic book. I can't follow the dialogue balloons, but I don't need a dictionary to translate the pictures. A man and a woman, gravely prim in gay 90s high fashion, stroll in a park, blotting out the scenery with their conversation. Sentences that dwindle to phrases as they walk along and end with the woman's "Qu'est?" as the man grabs her into his arms. In the last panel, her parasol is falling as she, grabbing him back, surrenders to his kiss. Behind them, there's a question mark encased in a halo like a saint. Naturally, I'm eager for the page to turn, but my page turner turns around instead, kissed by something he just remembered. Peering worriedly past my hip, he asks, "Está bien?" I look under my arm at a couple across the aisle, perched on the edge of their seat, arms draped over the seat in front to brace the shoulders of their twins. Identically pretty little girls, their light brown skin and straight black hair made even lovelier by identical pink dresses. Their closed eyes and drooping heads answer, "Está bien," the man mutters sheepishly and settles back to his comic book. The parents, evidently his guests, hold shyly proud smiles over the heads of their sleeping beauties. I smile too, feeling less like a ghost now than guardian angel. I'm still feeling a bit ethereal when I get off the bus alone. It's a quarter mile to the house on another dirt road, passing prickly pear and century plants, behind them cornfields, bucolic mess of stubble and piled up stalks. In the plain light of day, it's a hard landscape to like close up. But twilight has erased thorns, manure, dead dogs, the trash in the roadside ditch. The chalky dust that covers everything has become a faint, silvery luminescence, thanks to the moon, just risen above the eastern rim of hills. A nearly full moon, amazingly large, in an equally incredible peacock blue sky. I'm enchanted, of course, but also mocked by skeptical detachment. Meaning to be wisely wry, I ask the moon, "Está bien?" The question boomerangs. The sleeping child is mine. Pure, stupid joy pours in. "Ya, corazón, it's only for a now that won't last long. But wake up, we're home." That poem was my intended finale, but this morning I received an email from Google inviting me to experiment with Bard. And they weren't talking about Shakespeare's birthday coming up. It's their generative artificial intelligence technology, which is similar to ChatGPT, the best publicized AI chatbot. I copied the 5 poems you've just listened to into that text box for Bard and gave it a prompt, asking it to write a poem in a similar style. The poem's theme should be to commemorate our gathering here to share poetry in celebration of National Poetry Month. What follows now is Bard's poem. I changed only 2 words that didn't seem quite right. Also, I forgot to ask Bard to give the poem a title, so here it is, untitled. A cool, well-ventilated space to escape the heat of a world gone mad. A respite from the violence and hatred that seems to spread. We gather here to celebrate the power of poetry, to find a sense of community in words that speak to our souls. We read our poems aloud, our voices filling the air, and for a moment we forget about all the pain and fear. We are not alone in this world. We are not forgotten. We are not helpless against the forces of evil and hate. We are poets, and we have the power to change the world one poem at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Our next poet is Amy Eisner. Amy Eisner teaches creative writing at the Maryland Institute College of Art, helping students develop as poets and integrate writing into their art practices. Her poetry has appeared in Fence, The Journal, Nimrod, Read, Sugar House Review, and other journals. She has been nominated twice for the Pushcart Prize. Welcome, Amy.
Hi. This first poem is on a painting that's in the Phillips collection. It's a painting of a pheasant by Chaim Soutine. Pheasant, Soutine. Go straight to the deadness of the bird, its mashed sleep face, deflated neck, muddied breast plumage like a dislodged skeleton inadequately cloaked by ethereal wings, the force of the gaze dragging the inside out, lighting small flames in the umber woods, freezing the pond around the fallen trees whose knots and wisps of gray are pheasant toes, some curled rigorously inward, some arced in a skater's path toward the black water, lit with the same red sunset that fires the feathers around the pheasant's slit eye and the tongue within the slightly open beak. Refuse to make the bird's death beautiful, and yet the landscape of the bird in death can't help but glow. And so, beneath the sheet, a surface, now joint bone, now table, jolts and loosens, flowing down its legs to hell. My husband and I went on a trip many years ago at a time when China was changing very fast. We'll be back someday. We couldn't find the Guilin meeting place. A huge black building unfurled a concrete plaza where we searched for each other like ants. On our return to Shigatse, the hotel furniture was out on the lawn. A bulldozer waited. Our bags were napping in our room. At Tiger Leaping Gorge, far below, tiny trucks etched a new road. The old road, even lower, would be drowned. In Beijing, the family compounds were being torn down. Dust of construction in my memory of duck, served the old way in an ancient room. First skin, then muscle, then bone. And then things changed and don't change. This one is called Lost Errand. Unworn shoes mound up, darkened contours, letting go the sweat of feet, hoarding the last tinge of polish. What is that sound, like a machine belt running, you hear from the back of the shoemaker's den? And that smell, like iron and books. In every town, the shoemaker was a small man with a black beard. Few words, no niceties. The register was a putty color. He would set the shoes, never like new, on the glass. Who is that self who brought a ticket to retrieve those shoes, walked again those streets, who sits now behind vertical glass, remembers such intimate work? The moon is on Zoom like everyone else. On Zoom, you show only one face, gesturing into a background of gauze. But sometimes you are sharp as a coin in a slot, sometimes bendy like a fingernail. Your spider babies simmer in a black-bottomed pot, each one a silver edge of air. Moon, although we have touched you out there, in here you are no dried and cratered thing. When we wake, we remove your crust from our eye, where a soft yellow globe corners sleep. So some of these are about different animals. This isn't really an animal, it's a little simpler than that. This one is about a unicellular organism. Let's just start simple. This one's called Grief. A kind of past is embedded in a creature of a single cell. The cell wall studded with knowledge of now, and now, and now. It only knows what is and was. The difference sends it lurching. It bails like a cucumber shriveling in salt, tumbles through an ocean of exchange. My son, who often used to get forgotten at school by me after school, does like to appear sometimes in a poem. Taking the car. Saying, take care. Is that fear? Saying, be good? Standing quietly in the doorway as the children drive off by themselves. They laugh like crazy, then call out and halt. The rear side window is covered in mist. One wipes the glass with a jacket sleeve, and off they go, the wrong way. Have you done this? Stood in the doorway and swung yourself open? She goes inside, writes for 15 minutes, an hour, the children a figment, coffee forgotten, rug full of crumbs, in no array. There was another one that was really about you, but I think I forgot to print it. You might be glad. Okay, this one's New Jersey. The long banana of a station wagon backs up, me in the back, going forward. How do you feel about your childhood memories? Chairs, upholstery. There was a lot of vinyl sticking to my thighs. I tried to imagine geography and failed. San Francisco had a dragon in the subway. Charleston was a frozen white chew. Our towns ran into one another. Children ran into pools. Pools ran by the rails, carrying thunder underwater, where we held our breath for as long as the train would pass. This is just a little prose piece. Oak tree surrounded by song. I listen to the birds the way the birds look at anything, with what sticks out from the side of my head. Rather than helping me locate the sources of sound, my axial ears take on the garb of left and right lieutenants lining up regiments of song. They refuse to believe a bird could be directly behind or in front of me, unseen. They gather their sounds and demand their pay. And behind the desk, my brain pays out what's due. These chitters, chirps, and calls to one side, those to the other. The encompassing forest, like the immersing orchestra, is an illusion played upon my bones and my flat little self, as flat as a bird with its opposing immobile eyes. This one's a prose poem as well. Grackles. This lawn having no grackles, the robins remain unperturbed. The deer, lacking dogs, can't be bothered to dart. Their noses, lacking gloves, remain wet, and their tails, lacking switches, unlit. Squirrels without nuts use their hands in make-believe ways. The iris blades mark semaphore all the windless noon. My windows, failing to shed dead leaves, make the house scurry all night. My height, lacking fact check, exceeds 5'8". My children, lacking boundaries, go out on the roof to rescue a sandwich. The sandwich, lacking mustard, takes flight. The gloss of rain, lacking heat, turns to ice. The grackles, lacking consistency, startle at the sound of the big green bin sliding me, lacking traction, down to the edge of the drive. Last two sea creatures. This one is an eel, or rather the poem is called Eel. Eel. Paradise, to be latched by the teeth to a bump of fighting fish. Oh, did that to myself. Paradise, to be latched by the teeth to a bump of fighting fish flesh, hardtack of the sea struggle. Oh, I am mistaken. That's not what eel teeth are for. Eels don't munch, but swallow. And those sharp and angly teeth merely prevent backsliding, require forward sliding. And so into the throat, shrimp and calamari go with kin-like ease, while micro shrimp deftly round the savage pylons with a sinuosity of their own. I'll close with this poem, Octopus. Its tentacles, encountering a hand, must notice the disqualifying slough of dead skin detaching, even at a touch. Finding this not fish, skin a flicker, sly, it swishes across the floor, reconnaissancing like a freelance spy, without an agency to consult, and is even free of the need to tire and slog, for though propulsion may strain, or the web-weaving legs capturing an enemy sprain, this flat-beaked, inside-out bird keeps a musical heart in its nest that can refrain from beating if it wants to take a rest. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Our next poet is E. Laura Golberg. E. Laura Golberg immigrated to America from England in 1969, and she has lived in D.C. since 1972. Her poetry has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize and Best of the Net, and her work appears in Barrow Street, Rattle, Poet Lore, and other publications. She won first place in the Larry Neal Poetry Competition in D.C. Welcome, E. Laura Golberg.
I am going to read a long prose poem and then, a few short poems. The long poem is M.V. Port Jackson. Now, M.V. stands for motor vessel, and it is the name of a ship. And this is dedicated to my mother. Let me just, excuse me. My elbow is scaly. Psoriasis, she says. My mother, Dr. Bertha B. Klempman, pours over it, gives me cream to rub in. This is her best interplay with the world. She knows how this is her best interplay with the world, how she shows love. 1. Johannesburg, South Africa, 1896 to 1938. David Klempman, her father, was a Jewish immigrant from beyond the Pale. He came to South Africa at 13 and, like most of his fellow young immigrants, became a rag and bone man. He picked up discarded clothes and housewares from the homes of wealthy residents of Johannesburg. Family law has it that he wrote ganef, the Yiddish for thief, on the houses of his best customers, so the other boys would avoid them. My mother, B., his oldest daughter, was born into poverty. She never even had a doll. But over the years, David, or Dovi as he was known, became a successful businessman. By the time B was at the University of Witwatersrand, the family lived in a house with a tennis court. Mr. Klempman had two ambitions for his daughters. They should be doctors and they should use his name. My mother always felt inferior to her sister. I was struggling at university, studying medicine, while my sister Sarah was excelling. Buffeted by expectations, both her own and of those around her, she was like a ship floundering in storm waves. Dovi understood that for her to succeed, she had to be away from South Africa. My mother's Aunt Rosie lived in Leeds, in the north of England. There was a fine medical school at Leeds University. Dovi told my mother to apply, and she was accepted. 2. Leeds, England, 1938 to 1941. B's cold, always cold. She writes to her father, the warmest summer's day is like winter at home. I've bought new clothes, lots of jerseys and warm vests, and for best, a wool suit with fur collar and cuffs. On September the 5th, 1939, B writes to her father, as you well know, the war's broken out. May I please come home? He replies, you come home when you have your degree. What kind of father orders his daughter to stay in a war? April 15th, 1941, B's asleep in her clothes. She always sleeps that way so she can go directly to the air raid shelter if necessary. Also, it's warmer. Auntie Rosie has a big house with a fireplace in every room, but because of the war, coal is rationed and there's only enough for the kitchen stove, heat, and also cooking food. Awakened by sirens, she grabs her bag with a ration book, identity card, precious letters from home. The house may be gone in the morning, rushes to the air raid shelter, full of frightened people. Aircraft and guns are made in Leeds. The Nazis know this, are sending high explosives down from the skies. The next morning, finals are scheduled, and all 5 women fail. She takes the exams again and passes. My mother was a doctor at last. She wrote the news with joy to Dovi. What kind of father knows that In order to flourish, his daughter has to succeed. 3. Internship, Mayday Hospital, Croydon, South London, 1941-3. She's woken at midnight. There's a man badly wounded, emergency surgery. B's the anaesthetist. The procedure's in full swing when they hear sirens. The surgeon ducks under the operating table. The anaesthetist, administering nitrous oxide oxygen ether, must stay with the patient. The patient is asleep. My mother is not. The wail of sirens continues, and when it ceases, she hears the placid breathing of the patient, which calms her. Then the all clear. The surgeon reappears from under the table and continues with the operation. Dr. Klempman's always hungry. Ersatz meats, eggless cakes, nothing fresh but apples and pears. Never enough. 6 months' clothing rations are required for one warm coat. All her stockings have holes. She mends them with weaves of stitches, neat darning patches like eruptions on her skin. At the end of the year, B will be fully qualified and can go home. There are no bombs at home in South Africa. There will be enough to eat and she can buy new clothes. She waits in the cold for the 68 double-decker bus that will take her to the South African embassy to book her passage home. She climbs the winding stairs to the top floor. It's a bit warmer up there. Traveling through London, she sees the blackout curtained windows like closed eyes, as if they were trying not to see the gaps in the houses where the bombs had fallen. Some of the bomb sites still have rubble. I can't leave. I've just learned how to help people in this ghastly war. I've got to stay. She gets off the bus, crosses the road, gets on the bus going back the other way, returns to her lodgings. Another year. She's getting so much experience, assisting at surgeries, working in casualty when broken bodies are brought in after an air raid. She works for 3 months in infectious diseases, sees polio, measles, syphilis. But her jitters are getting worse. At every loud noise, her body trembles. She wants to duck under the nearest table. At the end of the 2nd year, she knows she's had enough. She takes the 68 again, this time sitting on the ground floor of the bus, and books her passage home. 4. MV Port Jackson, 1943. Which ship, which date, which port? They won't tell her. Wartime security. Come back in mid-December and we'll give you the details. She says goodbye to her friends a week before she sails, so no one would know the date. On December the 20th, she's dressed in her best wool suit, 5 years old now. B had darned the holes caused by the moths, but couldn't find a way to mend the decimated fur. She catches the train to Liverpool. She walks up to the ship. She sees its red and black funnel, teak decks, and on its forward end the name MV Port Jackson. Am I quite mad to go on the ocean with U-boats and torpedoes? 5. Aboard ship. Captain Higgs joined the 12 passengers for dinner every night, taking turns at the round tables. He must have chatted with my mother, perhaps often. She was tall, slender, wavy brown hair, big eyes. 3 days out, the steward fell ill. The ship's surgeon, we'll call him John Smith, wanted to emulate Wheeler B. Lipes, pharmacist's mate first class, who in a submarine had successfully performed an emergency appendectomy. And that's true. It had been all over the papers. John Smith, with his private supply of whiskey, decided the ship's steward, Helmsley, had appendicitis and prepared to operate. The captain, smelling Smith's breath, wanted a second opinion. After all, there was a fully qualified doctor on board. He asked Dr. Klempman, "Would you look at the steward? I don't trust Smith, especially since he's been drinking." She was hesitant, but couldn't put a life in danger. "I know appendicitis," she told herself, "have helped with operations, know where to prod and poke, know where the pain should be." In this case, the pain wasn't there. She diagnosed the flu, treated it with the ship's supply of M&B, new sulfapyridine. Just a side note, this was really the first antibiotic, so it was really a big deal that they had that on the ship. The captain asked my mother, "Would you take over as ship's surgeon until Smith has dried out?" She had relied on the voyage as a chance to relax, start recovering from the past years of war, prepare for the tensions of home, and had not expected to have medical responsibilities. But she liked Captain Higgs, and her expertise clearly was needed. After all, she was a qualified doctor. The captain gave the ship's doctor keys to the hospital bay and the medicine chest. So Captain Higgs and the first woman doctor of the British Merchant Marine conducted their tour early every morning: galley, toilets, showers, rubbish disposal, dining room. She knew nothing of such inspections, but recognized filth when she saw it. 6. Home. The first sight of land, flat Table Mountain welcoming. They'd made it to Cape Town and safety. There was no one to greet the ship. No one had known of the voyage. Dr. Klempman walked down the gangplank to South Africa and home. She went to the nearest phone booth, telephoned her mother. "It's me," she said. "I'm in Cape Town," and all she heard was clunk. Her mother had fainted. Later, B caught the train to Johannesburg. This time, a crowd was at the station to greet her. Once home, she told me years later, "I was treated as if I fought the war single-handedly. I didn't like it. I felt like a deserter. I ate the fresh fruit and meat without desire. No one knew why I jumped every time a bus went by. Once I hid under a table. Everyone thought I was mad. My father understood, recognized ghosts that haunt, remembered how he brought Russia with him to South Africa, feared Cossacks on the veldt. He told me, 'In your mind, you're still in the war.'" When our mother died, my brothers and I went to see the local rabbi. My mother had not been an active member of a congregation, but had made donations. The rabbi asked us to tell him about our mother. My brothers were silent. So I told him what a fine and empathetic doctor she had been. After a few minutes of this, the rabbi asked us what kind of mother she had been. Again, silence from my brothers. I spoke up. She was a wonderful doctor. Now I have a few poems. The first is Cruel, but it's Crewel, which is a kind of needlepoint. Cruel. My mother sewed air raids, yellow zigzags, blue rumbles, people running red. No language but stitches pulled in and pulled out, needle a tongue. At 30, she left England, where she had hidden in underground shelters from fatal thunder, hunger the constant, sailed home to Cape Town, guavas, avocados, and quiet. In that quiet, a bus roared. She shot under a table, crouched, her left eye trembling. That eye signaled trouble when I was late coming home, like the silence of a doodlebug before it exploded. Some of you might know that a doodlebug was a bomb that the Germans sent over that wouldn't. It made a noise and then it stopped and you knew it was going to fall. The next poem is Knees. In the engagement photo, my father looks taller than my mother in her wartime dress. She had 2 inches on him. She told me, I bent my knees. You can just see, if you look carefully, 2 bulges of knee halfway down her skirt. That's why he married her. She knew what mattered to him, how she could mend things. In the photo 40 years later, when he receives his honorary doctorate, he stands in his red robe, orange sash. She's next to him again, wearing her silk suit. Her legs are straight this time. Lamppost. On a lamppost near Lake Garda, my mother drew a uterus, fallopian tubes snaking out, grasping ovaries with their fingers. This is your reproductive system, she said. In that Italian tourist town where a tale of men would always form behind a woman walking alone, my uterus was illuminated like the first letter of a holy manuscript. That's true, unfortunately. This is America. I'll take you to the grocer's, my mother said, and took me to the supermarket. She led me to the shelf where each loaf of bread was cocooned in its plastic wrapping. When no one was watching, she gave a loaf a punch worthy of Sonny Liston. As the Wonder Bread reinflated, she said, "This is America." This is the last poem. Keep your pecker up, said my mother, new to the US in her Fortnum and Mason skirts, stout Clark shoes. By the time she became director of the VD clinic, she'd stopped saying that word. When the banana boats docked in the port of Paranagua, the sailors went to see Paloma. When the banana boats docked in the port of Albany, the sailors went to see my mother. Thank you.
Thank you, Elora. All right. And our final poet is Bonnie Naradzay, whose poems have appeared in Agni, New Letters, Tampa Review, Florida Review, Crab Creek Review, and other publications. She was awarded the New Orleans MFA program's Poetry Prize in 2010 with a month stay in the castle of Ezra Pound's daughter, Mary. That's pretty cool. She has led poetry sessions at homeless shelters and a retirement center in D.C. Welcome, Bonnie.
It is a huge honor for me to be here. I love Takoma Park, the Cultural Center's offerings. I also want to thank you, Taylor, for your wonderful introduction. Yes, it was a lot of fun living in Ezra Pound's daughter's castle, and we had tea together. And I got to listen to the cuckoos calling to each other in the Dolomite Mountains. Hi. So I'm just going to read a few poems, and thank you so much, everybody, for coming. It's everybody who read before me set a very high bar. I'll just read you what I have here. And just to let you know, the first poem and the last poem that I read will be about people in the day shelter for the homeless. So when I read the second one, you know that's the end, okay? And the first one is called Paradise in the Day Shelter for the Homeless. What they like best today is the poem I brought about a paradise you can conceal in your pocket so no one will steal it. Queenie, who keeps hearing aids in a Ziploc bag in her pocket, asks what free verse is. It's verse you don't have to pay for, Chuck tells her. Is paradise a place? Paul asks. Mo shakes his head and says, it's a sleeping bag at night that turns into a jacket in the morning. Leon, who sleeps on steps outside St. Paul's, muses that paradise could be a place to live, a tent or a camper. I say, you'd need a big pocket for that. Robert wonders, if I see it, will I recognize it? Carl says, if you speak of paradise, you must consider hell and the duality of existence. Eugenia replies, Jimmy Buffett sang of cheeseburgers in paradise, and a slice of onion is heaven on earth. That all actually happened. So I'd like to read a pantoum, and it's called Lines, and I read it early in the pandemic. And I remember I was standing in line outside Trader Joe's where they had these little markers 6 feet apart where you're supposed to stand and everything. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm standing here at Trader Joe's to buy frozen broccoli and frozen gyoza, which I recommend. And so then I wrote this. This has been done before, standing in line for a long time. Think of Soviet women who queued for hours for bread. And I have learned about the lines of the Great Depression. Men lined up for mind-numbing jobs at assembly lines. Think of Soviet women who stood for hours for bread, or Akhmatova outside the prison waiting for news of her son. Here, men lined up for mind-numbing jobs at assembly lines. These days, some have it easy, food deliveries, yoga online. Akhmatova outside the prison waited with women for news and the chance to send a loaf of bread or a note inside. These days, some have it easy, food deliveries, yoga online. Still, Camus said the plague is within us, here to stay. I have learned about the lines of the Great Depression where hope envisions a loaf of bread, a note from inside. Camus wrote that the plague is within us, here to stay, as it has always done, waiting in line for a long time. Okay, now we're going to switch to a jaunty poem. With this, I just read you a pantoum. The poem I'm reading now is in sapphics, only in terms of the fact that you've got 11 accents and then 5, or I should say 11 syllables and then 5. So it's 11, 11, 11, 5. And this is called Oh Florida because I went to college in Florida. And this is what happens when you go to college in Florida. Winters were mild. We imported peyote, practiced missionary acts on rattan mats. Cockroaches waved their ludic feelers at us. We faked our IDs. Mr. Aycock, in Existential Lit, taught us that free will is just like refusing painkillers when sitting in the dentist's chair. It sounded easy. Real flamingos hung out at the nearby pool, idly standing on single legs to see us walk the plank by falling off the diving board because we felt free. We scanned verses and crammed marijuana seeds in Louisiana picayunes just to blow smoke rings in the air near our professor, a sad PhD. Eels hid in weeds submerged in the placid lake where we water skied close to the cypress trees hung with curlicues of gray-green Spanish moss, our own Innisfree. So that's a trip through college. And I'm sure that everybody had similar experiences. Right? Okay, so this is a blues, in the blues form, and it's when I went to Blasket Islands, which is outside the southwest part of Ireland near the Dingle Peninsula. Blasket Island blues. We stumbled over ancient graves for the unbaptized dead. Yes, tripped on broken headstones for the unbaptized dead. Their small bones were buried near the Celtic gods instead. It took till nearly midnight to get the stove to work. Flipped knobs, unwrapped foil. Nothing would work. Finally baked some mackerel and got the wine uncorked. We huddled near sheep on the blaskets in the rain. The stone-walled, roofless huts let in sheets of rain. Meadow grass was flattened where the sheep had lain. Harvested blackberries by the road the last day of our trip. Our mouths bled purple stains that last part of our trip. We packed, dropped off the rental car. That was it. So I'm going to read a small poem about something that I learned about in Japan. And I'm sure you read about it. Japanese go to an empty phone booth and talk through an unplugged rotary phone so they can talk to the dead. It's called One-Sided Conversation. A man in Japan in a small booth overlooking the Pacific holds the receiver of a disconnected rotary phone and calls into the wind. He is talking to his dead cousin, whom he misses terribly, and who died before the tsunami arrived. Now he shares his phone booth with relatives of all who are dead or missing out there somewhere. People come from all over. I can't hear him, but he heard me, someone said of her son, who died in a fire. I can go on living now. Now I'm going to read a poem that maybe I won't, maybe I will. Okay, this present life, this has a story to it. A friend of mine told me that I should always tell a story about my poems, and Bede lived in the 7th century AD in England, and he is famous for being a scholar, and also for writing ecclesiastical history of England. And there's one story in that history where he explains that the king at that time was wondering whether or not he should convert to Christianity. And what Bede did was he told a story about swallow that flies in from the unknown, high up in the rafters. It's dark out. He flies through this mead hall. People are drinking and having a good time, and there's a fire. And then the swallow very quickly flies out the other side into more darkness and into the unknown. And this was his explanation to the king as to why he should convert, because there's a sense of hope that is offered by a religion which says there's something more than that. So this is called This Present Life, and the epigraph is sensus non ordo, and I'll explain that later. How does this present life compare with the time given to us on either end? We cannot always go on singing in the mead hall, filled with friends, passing the harp around, all while a cowherd is having visions in his sleep. Where the wind moans outside in dark cathedrals of black spruce, junipers, and animal sounds. Is that our afterlife? When a sparrow flies, as Bede describes it, through a crack in the hall, under the roof beams, then out the other way, he goes back into darkness and moaning winds. Soon the cold will find its way inside and kill the glowing warmth with permafrost. So why not tell the Kentish king instead about the Lord who wrote with his finger on the ground until all the Pharisees were gone? What did he write? That's what I wonder. Forget about the afterlife. This is the sense, but not the words, in order. And this is translation from sensus non ordo, which means you got the sense, but not the order. And that's famous because Bede wrote that about the difficulty of translating anything. And what he was doing was he was translating Caedmon's hymn. Okay. So with my friends, I have been walking every morning, not that much lately, but it kept me alive through the pandemic, is to walk through Brookside Gardens. I don't know if you've ever walked there. It's in Montgomery County. And so I took some images from that walk and combined them with something else. Sacraments. The magnolia's petals are splendidly pink, and the turtles have lined up on a log that juts over the pond as sunlight falls through the slanting reeds. I miss those mornings when you tossed up the tea bag in an arc and aimed it to land in your cup. And that time you showed me how to hold the imaginary cue stick so you could teach me how to win at pool. I miss those nights we spent ranking the screw top wines we drank. Here, minnows swim with a dark fluency, sending ripples from just under the surface, as you are doing to me now, and barn swallows arc through the lambent air. I think I read like, okay, two more. And this poem is something that I experienced when I was in Cornwall in England in January. So my daughter lives in England. I had gone to visit her. It's called Presence. In the middle of my journey through Cornwall on the Atlantic side, 6 hours by train from Paddington, Though I was there during a lonely time in January, I grew to like it without meaning to, standing at the shore near the wharves, taking ferries all day, ordering fish and chips. Though you could say a rootless, solitary life can last for just so long. I thought of Ovid, the poems he sent home after he was banished far to the north of Rome at a Black Sea outpost, after his urgent pleas to return went for naught. Old man by then, he was reduced to simple gestures in Thomas, which made him the barbarian, not them. His Latin verses being worthless now, he began to enter the language there and realized the people valued friendship, as he said in Tristia. For me, friendship was a small church next to the seawall on a cold and windy afternoon. Opening the rough-hewn wooden door, I saw a kindly gentleman standing near the altar. He was sharing his thoughts about the gifts the wise men had brought. It was Epiphany Sunday. And he was sharing them with 3 old people sitting close to each other on a pew. He gestured to me. Come in, abide with us. This is the last poem, called After the Poetry Salon in the Day Shelter for the Homeless. It's time to rise and go before the doors are closed. When I ask what they'd like to read next time, Tony, who sleeps on the steps of St. Paul's and quotes the Psalms, wants more from Yeats. After reading The Coat today, they asked why he would turn away from mythologies if they kept him warm. Small passing facts. Carl sleeps near the M Street Bridge unless the weather's really bad. He likes Eliot, especially that one about Prufrock. Tariq hides clothes near the library. Loves Rumi. Robert, slowly rising from the table, wants poems about the arrival of spring, despite the snow that fell last night and froze the daffodils. Last week, after we read poems by Franz Wright, Sheila wrote about walking to Martha's Vineyard when the tide was low. She asks for love poems like How Do I Love Thee, which she once knew by heart. Leaning on his cane, Mo says poetry makes him forget about his troubles and his pain. We are nearing the threshold of both worlds. Outside, we climb stairs into the light-filled morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. And thank you to everyone who came tonight. Thank you to all the poets especially. Please do talk to them. If they have books to read or to sell, rather, please do purchase them. Thank you all for showing up for poetry. It's really important to do that. I'm Taylor Johnson. Again, I'm your poet laureate. If you live in Takoma Park, that is. I'm going to close with a poem by Terrence Hayes, American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin. Inside me is a black-eyed animal bracing in a small stall, as if a bird could grow without breaking its shell, as if the clatter of 1,000 black birds whipping in a storm could be held in a shell. Inside me is a huge black bull, bald small enough to fit inside the bead of a nipple ring. I mean to leave a record of my raptures. I was raised by a beautiful man. I loved his grasp of time. My mother shaped my grasp of space. Would you rather spend the rest of eternity with your wild wings bewildering a cage, or with your 4 good feet stuck in a plot of dirt? Have a good night, y'all.